tell us what we should condemn and what we shouldn't. Okay, see, just if we allow a punch, if we don't condemn punches, even though in itself it might be just as real as a terrible, terrible, terrible comment. But once you throw a punch, it's a positive feedback loop. And when we have critical recognition, we know it can be hard to stop. That's why I don't remember hitting a woman. I blacked out. I'm sorry. This is something that psychologist Kip Williams from Purdue University knows from experience. He was out in the park walking his dog one day when he was hit in the back with a frisbee. He threw it back to one of the two guys who were playing with it, who then began tossing it back to Kip. This was fun, but after about a minute, they stopped throwing the frisbee to Kip and returned their attention to each other. At first, Kip thought it was amusing, but then it became clear that they were not going to include Kip in their game again. The psychology professor was surprised at how upset he was by his exclusion, given that he had only been included in their game for a minute and that these were complete strangers. He realized how sensitive we are to ostracism. That's what I was looking for. Let's tell that story again. What a great story. So Kip Williams, psychologist at Purdue University. He's out in the park, he's walking his dog, and he gets hit in the back with a frisbee. So he throws it back to one of the two. He's about to continue his way, but then they throw it back to him. Okay, cool. So he throws it back to them, one of them. Then one of them throws it back to him. He throws it to them. One of them throws it back to him. He throws it to them. And it just keeps going between the two of them. His dog is finished taking a shit. It's time to pack it up and leave. They don't want you in their group. That's so fantastic. Because that group membership, it is K's, bro. And so it's very sensitive on the anti-delivery side. We don't need to have been a part of a group for long. I mean, even I think it annoys me so much if another camper doesn't wave at me. If I'm driving, I'll let it go. I'll curse at them or something. I mean, not curse at them, but curse under my breath. Assholes, whatever. But if we're so about a week ago, I arrive in Cadiz. I spot this beautiful beach parking lot. Go to it. I walk Neo to the beach. We're walking back, and there's a lot of campers in this parking lot. And one of the camper people, he's standing next to his camper, sitting next to it. We make eye contact. So I wave at him. So there is an understanding we are part of a group. In my head, we are part of a group. There is a fraternity among RV people. Anything that you can have in common with someone is a reason for a group, for a social brain, right? And not only that, we're sharing residence. We both live in RVs. We have that possession in common. We may have some certain lifestyle things in common. And also we are living in the same place. And also we may have similar struggles while we are here. I don't know, or similar pleasures. So we're members of a group. So I wave. And he looks away. And sometimes I let it go. Didn't feel like it. Because maybe he glanced at me again or something. So I wave. Nothing. At some point, okay, if I'm being generous, at some point there was there was some acknowledgement, but it was like I don't want to give you any acknowledgement. All right, yeah, fuck it. Like, all right, you're there. Gosh, okay. I didn't like that. I think I said hello. He completely ignored me. And I thought that his plates were German, so I went over there. I said, Germans don't like saying hi. I've had it up to here with Germans. You don't fucking say hello. And in the U.S., we're used to some kind of interaction if we're sharing a space. I mean, not necessarily in a city or when we're on our way to things, but if we're at a destination together in a small space, or at least, and we are aware of it. We'll jump at any opportunity. All someone has to do is drop something, makes a noise, people startle, they laugh, and now there's conversation. But in France, there maybe isn't that, but you have to say hello. So coming from that culture, I hate Germans for that. Anyway, he said he wasn't German. And then he wanted to speak Spanish, but he had a weird accent. Anyway, but we spoke Spanish, and he was like, who are you? Who are you? Like, what are you doing? You're being crazy. Like, who are you? Like, I like animals, not people. And I was just like, yeah, it's just a hello, bro. It's just a hello. You need that. So one reason, group membership. Another reason, it's some stupid safety mallet where it's like anybody who like is weird or sneaky or acknowledges weirdly or doesn't acknowledge, doesn't make the right kind of eye contact, makes too much or makes too little, that's a threat. And this is where I'm going to be sleeping, so I need to resolve it. Of course, it's not really rational because nothing ends up happening. And whether or not you detect a threat, it's going to be very unrelated to whether or not there is a threat. But anyway. Ah, gosh. I'm sorry. That's a fun story. Kip took his experiences from the park and developed a computer simulation known as Cyberball. I remember this, in which adult participants had their brains scanned as they played a game in which they had to toss a ball back and forth between two other teammates. Just like the Frisbee event, Cyberball was going along fine until the two others started to only pass the ball back between themselves and ignore the adult in the brain scanner. And sometimes it wasn't even people, right? When this exclusion became obvious, the anterior cingulate cortex, ACC regions of the brain, were activated by social cognition, started to light up with activity. This is because the pain of rejection also triggers the ACC, a result of its importance as a mechanism for conflict resolution. The social exclusion of the game had initially caused consternation and then distress as it activated areas associated with emotional pain. Just like ego depletion, those who were rejected by colleagues were more likely to eat fattening cookies, which is probably where comfort food gets its potency. When we say that our feelings are hurt, it may not simply be a metaphor we are using. We really feel as much pain as from a punch in the stomach. What is remarkable is how sensitive we are to being rejected. Even when participants played Cyberball for only a couple of minutes and were told it was only a computer simulation, they still felt the pain of rejection. And this pain had nothing to do with the personality of the players either. They were not overly sensitive. Rather, there's something very fundamental and automatic about ostracism. It's haze, bro. Williams argues that this reaction must be hardwired and points out that in many other social species, ostracism often leads to death. That's why humans are so sensitive. As soon as it looks as though we are in danger of being ostracized, we become hypervigilant to those around us, looking for clues in the way people are interacting and opportunities to re-engage with the group. Excluded individuals engage in behaviors that increase their likelihood of being reconciled back into the group. We are more likely to mimic, comply with requests, obey orders, and cooperate with others who don't deserve it. We become obsequious to the extent that we will agree with others who are clearly in the wrong. If these ingratiating strategies fail, then ostracized individuals switch tack and turn from being likable to being angry and aggressive. Look at me, I am worthy of attention. Incels, look at me, I'm worthy of attention. I am not invisible, damn you. Individuals no longer care about being liked, but rather want to exert their influence on others to take note of. Look, high stakes emotions. Starts with anxiety. If that doesn't work, anger. Okay? People who have been ostracized are less helpful and more aggressive to others, whether or not the others are the perpetrators of the ostracism. For example, in one study, ostracized individuals sought revenge by giving an innocent bystander 5 times the amount of hot chili sauce as a punishment, even when they knew the victim hated the sauce. That's why it's a punishment. For example, in one study, ostracized individuals sought revenge by giving an innocent bystander 5 times the amount of hot chili sauce as a punishment. It's a punishment because they knew the victim hated the sauce. Many of the tragic cases of school shootings and murderous rampages involve individuals who feel they have been socially rejected. An analysis of the diaries of school shooters found that in 13 of the 15 cases examined, but of course, we have to be wary of data snooping, the perpetrators had been targets of ostracism in 13 of the 15 cases. Clearly, not everyone who has been ostracized goes on a shooting rampage, but if the ostracism persists, then excluded individuals eventually experience alienation and worthlessness. And sometimes that can become anger. They often withdraw from society and become profoundly depressed and contemplate suicide. And sometimes when that becomes anger, there's still other its that mitigate that. But sometimes, just like, oh yeah, I am justified, bro. I'm angry. I fucking should be angry. I should fucking do something about this. They often withdraw from society and become profoundly depressed and contemplate suicide. As humans, we all need to belong. Section. Do you want to be in my gang? In his resignation telegram to an elite Beverly Hills social club, Groucho Marx wrote, "Please accept my resignation. I don't want to belong to any club that will accept people like me as a member." Now, who is Groucho Marx? Is he not one of the Three Stooges? He is. Please accept my resignation. I don't want to belong to any club that will accept people like me as a member. Whether we like it or not, we're all members of clubs. As a social animal, we cannot help but hang out with others. Even those of us not in a family can identify significant others in our lives. Friends, Romans, and even countrymen. Ultimately, we are all members of one very big club, the human species. No man or woman is an island. Of course, there are some among us who reject being with others and seek out the isolated life of a hermit, but that is not the norm. They are the weirdos amongst us. And sometimes you're so social, but you can't be in a group that doesn't have critical recognition. Is that my only option? Groups that don't have critical recognition? Dang, bro. Okay, I'll be out here and try to help them get critical recognition. Most of us just want to belong. There is a drive deep inside us that compels us to be accepted by others, which we see it. My videos, the fact that I'm making videos. A lot of the whole point of the videos, it's like, oh, I got ostracized, but you can get to know me, and I think you'll like me, and we're gonna have a bond. Some group membership is relatively fixed and independent of what we want. It's relatively fixed and independent of what we want. Age, sex, race, height, and nationality, for example. Although sometimes we try to change even these. Lie about our age, cross-dress, have surgery, wear elevator shoes, and become a nationalized citizen. Other groups we aspire to join throughout our lifetime, the in crowd, the jet set, the high flyers, the intelligentsia, or the seriously wealthy. Some of us are assigned to groups we would rather not join. The poor, the uneducated, the criminal classes, or the drug addicts. People do not normally choose to be any of these, but we are all members of groups whether we like it or not. Furthermore, it is in our human nature to categorize each other into groups. Even those who don't want to be categorized are a group unto themselves. They're the dropouts and the outsiders. We categorize others because it makes it much easier to deal with strangers when we know where they are coming from. Speaking of not having critical recognition, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and she was like, and we had hung out with some trans folk, and one of them is kind of obviously trans, voice, hands, height, and sort of facial structure. But my two lesbo friends, they were talking about, I don't know, is she like a trans woman? Is she? I don't know. Look, and then my friend's girlfriend had said to her, "Look at her fucking feet. She wears size 46, which is like a 13 or something. Oh, she's fucking trans. And they had to figure that out. What none of us knew was that the other one was also trans. But anyway. And we had to figure this out. And my friend was talking about this and how she didn't bring it up because, you don't bring that up. Sometimes I forget that lesbians gay people, they don't know what to do either. I mean, I feel like gay men I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm going to stop making stupid generalizations. All right, anyway. They had no idea what to do with that. And anyway, so she said, I wanted to know, but it doesn't matter to me. So it's stupid to want to know. It's not going to make a difference to me. So I don't really need to know. Now, it may be irrational to want to know, but that doesn't mean that you don't really need to know. You'll be fine if you don't know, but having critical recognition, we know that there are a whole bunch of mechanisms that are ready to categorize and all of this stuff. And so when we don't know what associations to associate with a thing, cis woman, I've got certain associations. Trans women, I've got certain associations. And the brain is an associative machine, a social associative machine. And it's just looking for, okay, how does this fit in everything else? How does this person, who is not a person except a thing that relates to other things I got going on in my mind? Okay, when we don't have critical recognition, we have this idea of you see them as a person, that they're a person. Okay, well, that's not how the brain works. It is a good thing to encourage, and the brain can do some of that, but there will also be eating away. But that's what we try to do, of course, and that's what's good about the fact that we're not really allowed to ask, is that you're forced to, you'll go crazy if you keep trying to figure it out. So you're forced to just kind of ignore it or come up with an answer. And then anyway, you're forced to just sort of get to know the person more. And maybe that's to get clues. I don't know. But in any case, you're getting to know the person more and you end up seeing the person more as an individual. So it is good that we don't actually ask. I would have thought in the past, oh no, but that's okay. But actually, no. I think it is good that anything that we have major associations with, and when we meet someone where we don't often meet members of a group that we have that we have things to associate with, you should not find out that is an instance of that group if you don't often meet members of that group. Yeah, that's a big difference. Yeah, and that's an important difference. Now, if you meet members of that group all the time, then your association is going to be more nuanced and fluid and less fixed anyway. So you should know immediately. It'll just be more information. You'll still be getting to know the person because you have to get to know the person because you're always meeting people from that group. So you can't just have certain things that are true for the whole group that you can rely on because people keep showing you that the group is diverse. Yeah. That's important. We shouldn't know group membership if it's rare that we meet members of that group. So if you have critical recognition, well, no, you're not going to just avoid, oh no, I don't. But there are times where we could put systems in place such that if you're about to meet someone, you need to get to know them. Major question: are they a member of any group that you rarely meet and have ideas about? They are. You're probably not going to be able to really get to know them then. Once you realize they're a member of that group, you're just going to project a bunch of stuff. So, you need to not know. So we're gonna have to do a blind interview or whatever. Very good. Anyway, so I told her, no, it's totally natural. You're not rational. Of course, that's gonna be eating away at you a little bit. You're gonna be wondering that. It's not, and it's like it's also a major part of people, so it's also kind of rational to want to know. But the thing is that the brain's shit, so you actually shouldn't know. Interesting. I mean, I don't think I ever really got to know her though, because the trans thought, because the whole time I was thinking about a guy that I knew who had started to have some questions about his identity, and I just thought they were very similar, and so I was just all in that association. And so it's a shame that, I mean, the moment I saw her, uh, uh, I'm sorry, there's something that could have sounded really bad there, but she doesn't owe me anything, that opportunity or anything. Okay, she was beautiful, wonderful. I'm so happy that she's happy. Um, and I wish that I had gotten a chance to get to know her better. Um, and so I just need to meet, if that's important, and if I hate missing out on trans people, I just got to meet a bunch of trans people, so that isn't a part of the evaluation anymore. Adapt Habituation. Wait, he was talking about adaptation before, didn't he? Wait a minute. Well, didn't he talk about adaptation? I thought he had said habituation. Did he say habituation? Habituation. No, dude. Adaptation. Yeah, this process called adaptation is one of the organizing principles operating throughout the central nervous system. And about relative change. I had thought he was talking about habituation. Okay, this process called adaptation. Although both hands are now in the same water, one feels that it is colder and the other feels warmer because of the relative change from prior experience. Okay, so it's not about sort of getting used to something, but like briefly getting used to something. Or it's not about the getting used to it, but it's just about having been exposed to it. And it is because habituation is also one of the organizing principles operating throughout the central nervous system, isn't it? All right, back to page 192. Okay, and lights going. All right, we'll stop. We'll stop at 1 hour. Okay. We categorize others because it makes us much easier. It makes it much easier to deal with strangers when we know where they're coming from. We do not have to do as much mental work trying to figure out how to respond, and can react much quicker when we categorize, because the brain needs categories. Now you might think, well, you don't need those things. Figure out how to respond. Without those things, do the mental work. No, no, no. These gears work on categories and associations. This is a general principle of our brains. We tend to summarize previous experiences to be prepared for future encounters. It's unlikely to be an evolutionary adaptation to optimize. Oh, it's likely to be an evolutionary adaptation to optimize processing loads and streamline responses. When we identify someone as belonging to a group, this triggers all the stereotypes we possess for that group, which in turn influences how we behave toward the person. The problem is, of course, that stereotypes can be very wide of the mark when it comes down to the characteristics of the individual. Those stereotypes can also be manipulated by others as well as by prejudice, which means we can all be biased to be biased. In one study, participants had to inflict painful punishment on fellow students in a learning experiment, and they were allowed to choose the level of pain to administer. If they accidentally overheard an experimenter describe the students as animals before start of the experiment, the participants chose more severe punishments. They were influenced by others' opinions. Most of us say we hate to be pigeonholed, but the truth is that it is in our nature to label others and be labeled ourselves. And that process is highly dependent on what other people think. We are less self-assured than we believe in making our minds up. It is the group consensus, not the individual opinion, that determines how most of us evaluate others. The groups we belong to define us. Just going to read to the end of this section, okay? that define us, but we are constantly entering, leaving, expanding, and swapping our groups. People obviously benefit from the collective power of groups as well as from the resources and companionship that can be shared and the offloading of cognitive processes. But membership is also necessary for generating a sense of self identity. Just belonging to a group shapes our self because we automatically identify with other members. We know this from the work of social psychologists like Henry Teifel, who used to be the head of my department. Before he came to Bristol in the 1960s, Teifel witnessed the power of groups when he was a French prisoner of war, having been captured by the Germans during the Second World War. In fact, he was a Polish Jew, but he kept this aspect of his identity secret from his German prison guards. After the war, Teifel okay, so they just thought he was a French resistance soldier. Okay. After the war, Teifel dedicated his life to understanding group psychology. In what is now regarded as a classic study, he showed that arbitrarily assigning Bristol schoolboys into two groups by the toss of a coin produced changes in the way that they treated each other. Those in the same group or in-group members were more positive to each other and shared resources, but hostile to out-group members, even though they were all from the same class, and that the group membership had decided by a flip of a coin. Lighting, this is cool lighting. This is very cool. But we're not going to continue because it's nighttime, and the next section though is what's in your eye, brother. Ooh, Martin Luther King Jr.
It is
No,
better
we're gonna stop.
So how would I do that? Just a quick thought here. 2024 Akbar 23 Deldi after 2100, definitely. It's gotta be almost 2200 actually. What I am announcing is that I would like, saying this out loud so it sticks as a thought and I can even start making it an action. Gosh, it requires changing. No, it's not that hard. So how to journal without using the word I? See, I is a word we can't go without when we're talking about me and you. But if I'm thinking about something or if I'm journaling about something where I don't need personal distinction, where it's maybe just about what's happening in my mind, it'd probably be more accurate to figure out a way for us to word mental processes without I did this, I blah blah. So basically what I think it could look like is using it theory vocabulary. You would say, rather than saying okay, so you started off in either case with I met this person today. Okay, now you're going to talk about your impressions. Rather than saying I didn't really like the person at first, you say the person's mannerisms or something about the person didn't sing at first. Something instead of saying I could tell if something was off about the person, you say something about the person choked. And then I got angry. Instead of saying and then I got angry, you say and then some anger livered, and and then rather than saying I was trying to be patient but I ended up getting angry, you say patience was livering, but then eventually the anger livered the patience. Rather than saying I yelled at the person, you say anger livered, and the specific words of my anger were you sloppy bitch. Rather than saying and then I felt bad, and then regret livered. Rather than saying, but then I noticed that there were people around and I think I didn't want to look bad. You say, but then conscientiousness of the group watching me, or potential group mates watching me, hyped the anger and kind of pulsed the regret. The cognitive dissonance resolution thing, you could say, livered there. And so X-livered additional commitment to the anger. Rather than saying nothing that the person said was, or I didn't find anything interesting, or nothing the person said was interesting, nothing that the person said slapped. Instead of saying I didn't have anything to say to them, no responses were slapped. Or maybe, and I think with it theory vocabulary, with the verbs, you can use them either way. So if it's typically, like there's a doer and a receiver, the receiver can also be grammatically presented as the doer, but still understood as like the receiver of the action. So for instance, rather than saying something slapped this feeling, you could say this feeling slapped. It was the receiver of slapping. It might not be clear there. They would say, what did the feeling slap? They say, no. Intransitively, the feeling slapped. Because you want to kind of use an active voice, which is why that's why there's that bi-transitive thing. Okay, very good. By the way, 2024 Ekber, 23 Deldy, even more after 2200, I'm guessing. In maybe not this video, maybe not even in the previous video, maybe in the before previous video, but it was definitely recorded today. I said something that I liked about science, which is that science does not affirm negations. That it affirms the things that it comes across. On the other hand, see, here's the thing. Sometimes I feel like people think of scientists as not being in awe, of not wondering, having questions, and wanting to understand more. But instead of just being in the business of, this is what's true, and we're going to affirm this all day long. But no, we affirm the things that we've identified, and then we ask a bunch of questions about it. I wonder if this is also there. I wonder if this does that, etc. And that's how knowledge grows. So we discover something, a bunch of questions, we answer some of those questions, we discover more questions, and every time, every question that gets answered is one more pixel that's had. Yeah, of course, maybe it's wrong and it'll need correction, but the idea is that's the idea, and then with the correction, which makes it even more awesome. So science and philosophy are both about affirming positives, or no, it's not about affirming positives. It's that if there are any affirmations made, it's about questions. It's about trying to affirm things in response to questions, and with, you know, practical use, predicting, stuff like that. Technology, you know. And then also, of course, understanding, just as its own thing. Luckily, we are wired
It doesn't seem like every human's wired this way, but it's definitely in the community population a real need or desire to understand things. So maybe everybody has that, but then they're happy to settle. Or their standards are too low, and that's what isn't very good with everybody. Well, it's not great with anybody, but we can only speak relatively. And the people who are higher percentile with their evidence standard, what it takes for them to be able to affirm a positive. And then there are people who are higher with their curiosity as well. Once a positive is affirmed, how much more do they need to know about it and its relationship to everything else? So, yeah. I think it's an incomplete picture to say science affirms the positive. Science isn't about affirming so much as discovering, learning, answering through questions and information. Take some questions, take some information, and you figure out an answer. And then if people say, hey, what's true? You say, oh, well, this answer is what I've discovered. And they say, but that would mean that this other thing, you're saying it doesn't exist. You can say that. And I've had questions, and I've looked for that thing. And all I can affirm is a negative of affirmation. I can't affirm a negative of the existence, only that I can't affirm. All I can affirm about that stuff that you're talking about is that I can't affirm anything about it, and also that it hasn't proved very useful in questions and hasn't yielded much, and that's all I can really tell you. But we mustn't forget to think about it's all about probability too. The world's too complex for absolute, for us to be able to articulate absolute truths. So we work in probability. Hey, if my experiment was good, if my interpretation of the results was good, if my experiment was good and nothing else crazy came in that even a good experiment couldn't have anticipated, and if all of that stuff, I can give you a percentage. I'll say approximately this is how confident I can be in this thing. This is how many times that result was repeated, and blah, blah, blah. But hey, that's the best I can give you. All right, cool.
I'm not a big believer in identity. I don't know that we ever should feel the pressure to identify ourselves as one thing with a sort of, menu attached. Because life's way too interesting for that, and we are morphing all the time. So the more easily we can just ride that horse all the way and enjoy all the different landscapes that it will take us on, the better. That's just going to be the easier way to go. I think the fight, all the stress and strain and incredible pain that humans, it's so very touching the way humans can create these terrible problems. This burden of identifying ourselves, I think is too much. I think we should be easier on ourselves.
Mismatch in intelligence in particular is a fundamental lack of insight into what the smarter party is doing and why it's doing it and what it will do next on the part of the dumber party. Right. So by analogy, just imagine that the dogs had invented us, their super intelligent AIs, for the purpose of making their lives better, just securing resources for them, securing comfort for them, getting them medical attention. It's been working out pretty well for the dogs for about 10,000 years, right? I mean, there's some exceptions. We mistreat certain dogs, but generally speaking, for most dogs, most of the time, humans have been a great invention, right? Now, it's true that the mismatch in our intelligence dictates a fundamental blindness with respect to what we've become in the meantime, right? So we have all these instrumental goals and things we care about that they cannot possibly conceive.
(2024) Ekber 24 Eddie 1153. You know what annoys me? I'm sorry, I shouldn't start like that. I often say that, and maybe not often enough, but I do often speak to my audience as though you're an irrational, arrogant fool. And some of you may be like, oh, that's not fair. I'm trying here. Imagine my mother now. I'm watching your videos. I'm trying. Okay. First of all, it's not... How do I put this? It's not an unnatural thing to be an irrational fool. I'm an irrational fool. We're just human brains, sort of doing our best. And if you're watching this, and that means that you're doing your best, and we're trying to gain critical recognition, learn how our mind functions, and how to better treat information, or how to at least learn how we already treat information, and certain missteps in our treatment of information that we can keep an eye out for, and we can be humble about. So we can, gosh, you know what? My brain isn't perfectly calibrated to treat information. Far from it. Some kinds of information, it's pretty reliable, but a lot of the information, especially the stuff that's important nowadays, not very reliable. So when I have a judgment about something, when I think I've treated information, or when I've treated information and I've come to a conclusion, I know that I'm the one who treated the information, so I will be epistemically humble and say, hey, maybe this conclusion is wrong. And I'll be sensitive to when people tell me that's wrong or try to show me how it's wrong. So that's great. Now, I'm not taking back the irrational fool thing. I'm saying don't be upset about it. It's kind of the first step to getting any smarter, is just saying, oh, I am not so smart, right? We have the book, You Are Not So Smart, and my dad just bought on our Kindle, or on our Amazon account, or on his Amazon account, which is connected to my Kindle, You Are Now Less Dumb. Oh, that's great. So that's awesome. Now, in case you weren't convinced that you're an irrational fool, because you're thinking, oh yeah, I'm not religious, I'm pretty sort of, not tepid, but I'm, what's the word, not apprehensive, but something between tepid and apprehensive about my own conclusions. I accept them never more than with 90% confidence. Blah, blah, blah. So you're thinking, so he's not talking about me. He's talking about the religious people. Maybe he's talking about the Trump people, maybe, or maybe, I don't know what my audience is. So if my audience is some rational right-wingers, some rational right-wingers. Nobody's rational, so it's not like I wouldn't put it in quotes if I was talking about left-wingers. But there's a thing with rationality in the right wing, but without questioning certain things. It's just such a weapon. But that's for all humans anyway. In any case, all right, well, here, let me ask you this then. Do you entertain the idea of a soul, of a metaphysical consciousness, or anything like that? Now, if you don't, then okay. All right, cool. Relatively speaking, you're not an irrational fool. But if you do, then you're only rational in the sense of what the mainstream culture is going with. So you accept evolution, you maybe accept climate change, and so on. And that is important. It is important not just that you accept those things, but it is important that when the culture says it's following science and that X is true, fuck, that's breaking, and that X is true, and then you accept it, that is great. That is really good, and that's so close. And in fact, maybe I'll say that you're no longer a dangerously irrational fool. You go with the scientific consensus. That's fantastic. I mean, the one that's shoved in your face. But here's the thing about the soul. If, let's say, you're a holdout on that, is the scientific mainstream consensus, you're not seeing in popular science magazines, oh, hey, there's no consciousness, there's no soul, there's none of that metaphysical shit that you guys try to put outside the reach of science. We're brains. Of course, as I've said, science isn't really about affirming the negative, but you have to sort of infer from what we have affirmed, brain, atoms, all that stuff, that, oh, okay, we don't need this other thing, this soul consciousness thing. All right, now, here's why I'm saying that you're an irrational fool, although maybe not a dangerous irrational fool. Here's why I'm saying you're an irrational fool if you don't, if you still entertain the idea of a soul. We have known your entire lifetime about evolution. Your entire lifetime, that has been an established fact, that organisms evolve. Organisms are biological. You've known that your entire life. Organisms, a biological evolution is a gradual change in genetics through generations and the demands of the environment. You've known that your entire life. You've known about the existence of the brain your entire life. You've known that things like Alzheimer's exist pretty much your entire life. So you are aware of examples of where the physical state of the brain changes, and it has an unavoidable consequence for the psychology. And it might not even be accurate to say it has an unavoidable consequence for the psychology. If the brain changes, the psychology has changed. You see the difference? Rather than saying if the brain changes, then the psychology changes. If the brain changes, the psychology has changed. Not before the brain changed, but at the exact moment that the brain changed, the psychology did as well. Because they're one and the same. And we've known that your entire life. It hasn't been broadcasted, but just a very simple deduction that you could have done at any point in your life. You could have gone, hey, the universe, made up of atoms, particles. Okay, specifically a biological organism. It's all about cells and the proteins and the mitochondria and so on. And the brain is cells. You've known your entire life that well, I mean, I think that's enough, right? if you were at all rational, which I'm not asking you to be, but I'm asking you to try to imitate it, and also to stop calling yourself rational since you haven't been able to make this simple deduction. We're made up of atoms. We're biological. We evolved. All our changes as an organism were genetic changes or cultural changes which changed our biology, our thought processes, by adjusting our brain. You've known, I mean, maybe you haven't known that the brain's, the frontal lobe and the prefrontal, or specifically maybe the prefrontal cortex, or I think it's all the frontal lobe, is developing until you're 26. Okay, maybe you didn't know that. So maybe you thought, well, you got a brain, but then it doesn't change over your lifetime. But I change, so therefore there must be something else. I think that's irrational. Then there must be something else. If you ever wondered, like, hey, I change, I have emotions and stuff, but if you already have learned that everything is real, that things are real and exist and can be measured and studied, then you shouldn't, if you're irrational, you shouldn't be so eager to introduce some other thing when that hasn't been necessary for anything else in the world. Except for stuff on a quantum scale, maybe. But not even that, really. So, yeah, no, I think that if you at all think that it's possible that there's a soul, and rather than justifying it right now, just ask yourself, does that follow from the things that I know about the universe? The things that I have accepted from science? The things that science has produced? I mean, maybe I didn't give a complete picture there, but I really, gosh. But anyway, we started recording because I was like, gosh, these people act like they're rational, and are gonna talk about consciousness and the soul when nothing has indicated that. I get that the illusion has indicated that. The fact that there's like an automatic belief of that, which then encourages the belief of that. Sure. Anyway, all right, we'll leave it at that. I have a bunch of cleaning and stuff to do. So anyway. I guess it was less sort of dramatic than I expected, but I think it is still as profound as I was thinking. But I don't know actually what that would do for you. Let's say you're someone who entertains the soul. You're not going to go, well, no, but if you go through it and you try to take a step back, leave your impressions alone for a second. What are the facts? The brain does things. Now, what is it that makes me think that it doesn't do everything? That's what you should be asking yourself. Why am I so ready to say, oh no, it doesn't do everything, even though we're discovering more and more things that it does? Yeah, then you're not following the evidence. Because it should be like, gosh, I feel like there must be something else. But I know that the world is made up of atoms, and the other thing I imagine is not made up of atoms. So let me try to. So just being rational is the correct treatment of information according to an objective. Let's just suppose that objective is to know things. So using the information to know more about those things that are relevant. And that is not what people have done regarding the soul, even the most quote-unquote rational, even those that are... so anyway, you can't be rational. You can't correctly treat every piece of future information. But you can you can correctly treat information that you've already been able to deal with the simple principle of sort of following it and believing it. So if you believe the atoms are the nature of the universe, is, you know, we've talked about these pieces of it, and everything is physical and so on. If you use that information, then you learn, oh, okay, so my experience is physical as well. 2024 Eckberg 25 Fox D. All right. Personal challenge. Here we go. We're on page 191 of 1636. We're on page 191 of Bruce Hood's The Self-Illusion. How the social brain creates the self or something. It's not page 191 in a print version, but on the Kindle version. And here's the challenge. I would love to be able to promise you that I can get all the way to 215, the end of the chapter. What chapter are we in? How the Tribe Made Me. But that seems crazy, and can't imagine that. But I'm going to make you a promise right now. I'm allowed to, of course, note things on paper, of course, but we're going to be extremely strict about the commentary here. Meaning in concrete terms. Well, it's not going to be very concrete, but I'm just not going to say shit, okay? All right, so How the Tribe Made Me. We left off. We're talking about, yeah, people were ostracized and the different reactions they have. First, they will try to, they'll be acquiescent, they'll try to ingratiate, and then they switch tack and turn from being likable to being angry and aggressive. Look at me, I'm worthy of attention. I'm not invisible, damn you. Individuals no longer care about being liked, but rather want to exert their influence on others to take notice. People who have been ostracized are less helpful and more aggressive to others, whether or not the others are the perpetrators of the ostracism. For example, in one study, ostracized individuals sought revenge by giving an innocent bystander 5 times the amount of hot chili sauce as a punishment, even when they knew the victim hated the sauce. Many of the tragic cases of school shootings and murderous rampages involve individuals who feel they have been socially rejected. An analysis of the diaries of school shooters found that in 13 of the 15 cases examined, the perpetrators had been targets of ostracism. Clearly, not everyone who has been ostracized goes on a shooting rampage. But if the ostracism persists, then excluded individuals eventually experience alienation and worthlessness. They often withdraw from society and become profoundly depressed and contemplate suicide. As humans, we all need to belong. Section, do you want to be in my gang? In his resignation telegram to an elite Beverly Hills social club, Groucho Marx wrote, "Please accept my resignation. I don't want to belong to any club that will accept people like me as a member." Whether we like it or not, we are all members of clubs. As a social animal, we cannot help but hang out with others. Even those of us not in a family can identify significant others in our lives. Friends, Romans, and even countrymen. Ultimately, we are all members of one very big club, the human species. No man or woman is an island. Of course, there are some among us who reject being with others and seek out the isolated life of a hermit, but that is not the norm. They are the weirdos amongst us. Most of us just want to belong. There is a drive deep inside us that compels us to be accepted by others.
I think we're it's okay. I think we're rereading a bit, but anyway. Some group membership is relatively fixed and independent of what we want. Age, sex, race, height, and nationality, for example. Although sometimes we try to change even these. Lie about our age, cross-dress, have surgery, wear elevator shoes, and become a nationalized citizen. Other groups we aspire to join throughout our lifetime, the in-crowd, the jet set, the high flyers, the intelligentsia, or the seriously wealthy. Some of us are assigned to groups we would rather not join, the poor, the uneducated, the criminal classes, or the drug addicts. People do not normally choose to be any of these, but we are all members of groups whether we like it or not. Furthermore, it is in our human nature to categorize each other into groups. Even those who don't want to be characterized are a group unto themselves. They are the dropouts and the outsiders. Categories. Uh, Chris Niebauer, the self, no self, whatever. We categorize others because it makes it much easier to deal with strangers when we know where they are coming from. We do not have to do as much mental work trying to figure out how to respond and can react much quicker when we categorize. This is a general principle of our brains. We tend to summarize previous experiences to be prepared for future encounters. It's likely to be an evolutionary adaptation to optimize processing loads and streamline responses. When we identify someone as belonging to a group, this triggers all the stereotypes we possess for that group, which, in turn, influences how we behave toward the person. The problem is, of course, the stereotypes can be very wide of the mark when it comes down to the characteristics of the individual. Those stereotypes can also be manipulated by others, as well as by prejudice, which means we can all be biased to be biased. In one study, participants had to inflict painful punishment on fellow students in a learning experiment, and they were allowed to choose the level of pain to administer. If they accidentally overheard an experimenter describe the students as animals before starting the experiment, the participants chose more severe punishments. They were influenced by others' opinions. Most of us say we hate to be pigeonholed, but the truth is that it is in our nature to label others and be labeled ourselves. It is in our nature to label others and be labeled ourselves. And that process is highly dependent on what other people think. We are less self-assured than we believe in making our minds up. If it is the group consensus, not the individual opinion, that determines how most of us evaluate others. The groups we belong to define us. But we are constantly entering, leaving, expanding, and swapping our groups. People obviously benefit from the collective power of groups, as well as from the resources and companionship that can be shared. But membership is also necessary for generating a sense of self-identity. Just belonging to a group shapes our self because we automatically identify with other members. We know this from the work of social psychologists like Henry Teifel, who used to be the head of my department. Before he came to Bristol in the 1960s, Teifel witnessed the power of groups when he was a French prisoner of war, having been captured by the Germans during the Second World War. In fact, he was a Polish Jew, but he kept this aspect of his identity secret from his German prison guards. After the war, Teifel dedicated his life to understanding group psychology. In what is now regarded as a classic study, he showed that arbitrarily assigning Bristol schoolboys into two groups by the toss of a coin produced changes in the way that they treated each other. Those in the same group, or in-group members, were more positive to each other and shared resources, but hostile to out-group members, even though they were all from the same class. All right, so now we're caught up. Gosh, do I want to not talk? So on the one hand, on the other hand, bro, I am who I am. I don't know, but let's just try this time not talking. Let's just try really hard. A lot's at stake. Just have to do this one time. Let's go.
Section, we're going to go all the way to page 215. Let's fucking go. Oh my gosh, let's go. Section, what's in your eye, brother? In fact, Teifel's study had been preempted a couple of years earlier in the United States by Jane Elliott, an Iowa third grade teacher from Middle America. The class had just been studying Martin Luther King Jr. as American of the Month when news came out that the civil rights leader had been assassinated on April 4th, 1968. The children had little experience of discrimination and could not understand why anyone would want to kill their man of the month. The following day, Elliott planned an audacious class project to teach them about discrimination. She told her class that there was very good evidence that children with blue eyes were superior to students with brown eyes. Following this revelation, Elliott afforded the blue-eyed students privileges such as extra long breaks and being first in the lunch queue. However, the next day, she said that she had been wrong, and that in fact the evidence proved that it was the brown-eyed children who were superior. This role reversal produced the same pattern. On both days, children who were designated as inferior took on the look and behavior of genuinely inferior students, performing poorly on tests where the superior group became more hostile, performing poorly on tests, whereas the superior group became more hostile to the inferior group, thinking them less worthy. Simply belonging to a group influences how you feel about yourself and how you feel about others not in your group. In fact, it is the favorable comparisons that we draw against others not in our group that help to define who we are. This is how we formulate our identity, by focusing on what we are not. The trouble is that by focusing on others, we miss our own imperfections. As Matthew chapter 7 verse 3 in the Bible reminds us when talking about small grains, motes of imperfection, "And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye?" Social identity theory has been refined and elaborated over the decades, with research demonstrating that people see themselves within a hierarchy of different groups that can shift periodically over the lifespan. Clearly, some changes in circumstances change our group affiliation. If we marry, have children, or become crippled, the groups to which we belong change by default. Because we occupy so many different positions throughout our lifetime, child, adolescent, worker, parent, etc., most of us see ourselves occupying multiple groups. In most instances, we perceive group membership as bolstering self-esteem. By being part of a larger affiliation, we gain a sense of who we think we are as individuals. This is a delicate balance we strive to achieve between our desire to be an individual and the need to belong to others. Although not every culture sees the need to strike this balance. Most of us believe that we know our own minds, and whether we decide to identify with a group or not is really up to us to decide. However, if anything has emerged in the field of social psychology, it is the revelation that such a belief is naive, as we are susceptible to the power of the group, whether we like it or not. Figure 6.1, Ash test of compliance. Which line, A, B, or C, matches the test line? You're not supposed to really say it's going to describe the experiment. Section, conformity. How good is your vision? Take a look at the lines in figure 6.1. And decide which one matches the line on the left. A, B, or C. A, B, or C matches the line on the left. This is pretty much a no-brainer, and unless someone has serious visual problems, you would predict that everyone would answer B. However,
However, it depends on what others around you say. In what is considered one of the most important studies of the power of groups, Solomon Asch had 8 participants take the line test. He held up cards with the lines on them and went round the room asking the participants which line matched the test line. In fact, there was only one real subject, as the other 7 participants were actually Confederates of the experiment. At first, everything seemed above board. Everyone agreed on the length of the test line on the first 2 trials. However, on the 3rd trial, the Confederates gave the wrong answer by saying that it was line C that matched. The real participant stared in disbelief at his fellow students. Were they blind? What would the participant say when it came to his turn? On average, what would the participant say when it came to his turn? On average, 3 out of every 4 participants went along with his fellow participants and also gave the wrong answer. Each did not suddenly become blind, but rather conformed in accordance with the group, so as not to be the outsider. Each participant was fully aware of the correct answer, but each did not want to appear different. They did not want to be ostracized, so they conformed to the group consensus. What about situations that are not so clear-cut, as in the case of a jury evaluating evidence? In Sidney Lumet's classic portrayal of the power of group psychology, 12 Angry Men, 1957. In Sidney Lumet's classic portrayal of the power of group psychology, 12 Angry Men, 1957, Henry Fonda stands alone as the one dissenting member of a jury. In the movie, a Spanish-American youth is accused of murdering his father, but Fonda gradually convinces the other jury members that the eyewitness testimony is not only unreliable, but false. This movie was made long before the experiments on false memories were conducted. As the movie unfolds, we see the dynamics of allegiances shift as Fonda tries to win the jury over man by man. It is a dramatic portrayal of the power of compliance and group consensus. When we conform, it is not so much the power of the group or peer pressure that shapes our behavior, but rather our desire to be accepted. Our need to conform is a powerful force that shapes us and literally changes the way we think. In other words, it is not just public compliance when we conform to the group, but true private acceptance of group norms. In other words, it's not just public compliance when we conform to the group, but true private acceptance of group norms. For example, when asked to rate the attractiveness of music or faces, if there is a discrepancy between an individual's liking and the group consensus, this triggers activation in brain regions associated with social cognition and reward evaluation. However, as soon as we have an ally, we become more self-opinionated. In Asch's line test, it only required the presence of one other dissenter to give the right answer for the effect to reduce significantly. When we are accompanied by another dissenter, we are no longer an individual, but part of a new group. The same thing unfolded in 12 Angry Men. That's why we seek out others who share our opinion, because there is strength in numbers. It's also one of the reasons that oppressive regimes quash any resistance as soon as it starts to appear. If we feel isolated and powerless, then we submit more readily to authority and are less likely to resist. This old French guy in the camper yesterday was like, yeah, but what's amazing is that black people didn't rebel. I don't understand. It's like, I don't understand, but I also don't understand how they didn't rebel. If we feel isolated and powerless, then we submit more readily to authority and are less likely to resist. History teaches that authoritarian regimes have managed to control people by terrorizing them into submission with acts of human cruelty and atrocity. But to suppress dissent, you need others to do your bidding unquestioningly. This is where the history teaches that authoritarian regimes have managed to control people by terrorizing them into submission with acts of human cruelty and atrocity. But to suppress dissent, you need others to do your bidding unquestioningly. This is where the power of the group can be manipulated to change the nature of the individual. This is where normal, good-natured people become monsters. Section: The Lucifer Effect. Do you consider yourself evil? Could you inflict pain and suffering on another human being, or a defenseless animal for that matter? Consider how likely it is that you would do any of the following: electrocute a fellow human until they were dead, torture a puppy, administer a lethal dose, strip search a coworker and make them perform a sex act on another worker. Most readers are appalled by such suggestions. However, Stanford psychologist Phil Zimbardo forces us to think again in his recent 2012 book, The Lucifer Effect, about how to make good people become evil by putting them in toxic situations that generate a downward spiral into degradation. Zimbardo convincingly argues that all of us are capable of doing the despicable deeds in this list, even though none of us thinks we ever would. This is because we believe that we are essentially good and that only bad people do bad things. Our whole legal system is based on this assumption that individuals are responsible for their own moral choices. But Zimbardo argues that the situations we can find ourselves in and the influence of those around us determine how we behave and treat others. If we believe our self-illusion has a core morality, then it is one that is at the mercy of those around us. Zimbardo, who rather resembles a popular portrayal of Lucifer with his goatee, is known for his infamous 1971 Stanford prison experiment, in which he investigated the consequences of simulating an incarceration scenario using ordinary students playing cops and robbers. It was to be a 2-week study of the effects of role-playing in the basement of the Stanford Psychology Department, which had been turned into a makeshift prison. Like Teifel's Bristol schoolboy study, on the flip of a coin, the volunteers were divided. Half of the student volunteers were to be the guards, and the other half were to be their prisoners, each earning $15 a day for 14 days. Most thought it would be easy money to loaf around for a couple of weeks. However, what happened next shocked everyone involved and has left a legacy in the literature on the psychology of evil that now explains many unbelievable examples of human cruelty. To simulate authenticity, the prisoners were arrested on a Sunday by real policemen, handcuffed, blindfolded, and taken to the prison where they were stripped and put in smocks without underwear. This was only the beginning of the humiliation. Then the guards, uniformed fellow students wearing mirror shades, met them. When they wanted to go to the toilet down the hall, the inmates were led out with bags on their heads. Their guards gave them a long list of rules that they had to memorize, and failure to do so led to punishment. Within a very short time, things began to deteriorate. Even though they had never been instructed to harm the inmates, the guards began to spontaneously torment and torture the inmates. In this authoritarian atmosphere, the inmates became psychologically distressed while their guards were getting increasingly out of control. From a scientific perspective, this was exhilarating. Even though everyone involved knew the setup was not real, the situation was creating real cruelty and suffering. Thrilled by the speed and ease at which morality seemed to be deteriorating, Zimbardo pushed on, largely as the scientist overseeing the project, but also as his role as the superintendent in charge of the prison. He was becoming a player immersed in his own fantasy story. His girlfriend at the time, another psychology professor, Christina Maslach, visited to see how the experiment was progressing and was shocked by what she observed. She told Zimbardo, "What you're doing to those boys is a terrible thing." A heated row between the lovers ensued, and she would later recall, "Phil seems so different from the man I thought I knew. He was not the same man that I had come to love." Zimbardo had lost the plot. He seemed unable to see what cruelty he had created.
After 6 days, largely at the bequest of Christina, he terminated the experiment. He married her the following year. For the next 40 years, the Stanford prison experiment has remained a controversial study both in terms of the ethics of putting people in this situation, as well as in its interpretation. Zimbardo thinks the devil is in the de-individuation, whereas others claim that all that was demonstrated was over-enthusiastic role-playing. That may be true to some extent. Maybe some of the students had watched too many prison movies like Cool Hand Luke, in which the guards also wore the same mirrored sunglasses and behaved sadistically. One of the student guards even adopted a Southern American accent, indicating a well-formulated stereotype of the typical correctional officer. They behaved as they thought the officers and prisoners should. But even if it was all acting, one is still left wondering, what is the difference between role-playing and reality? What does it mean to say that I may act in a terrible way, but that's not the way I really am? Who is the real me or self? Section, The Man in the White Coat. Some question the authenticity of the Stanford prison experiment. What would happen in a real situation of authority? This is where the work of Stanley Milgram is so relevant. Milgram was one of Solomon Asch's research assistants, and in early 1960s, he wanted to take his mentor's work further. In what has become one of the most notorious psychological studies, Milgram demonstrated the power of authority when compliance becomes blind obedience. It began with a simple advertisement in which participants were asked to volunteer and would be paid $4 an hour to take part in an experiment on learning and punishment to be conducted at prestigious Yale University. When each of the volunteers arrived at the laboratory, he or she met with the experimenter, wearing a white lab coat, and another middle-aged man who was introduced as another participant, but who was actually a trained actor. After a supposedly random decision, the experimenter explained that the volunteer would play the role of teacher, and the actor, the other participant, would play the role of learner. The learner was led off to another room, and it was explained that the teacher would read words to the learner over an intercom. The learner would then repeat the words back to the teacher. If the learner made a mistake, the teacher would press a button that delivered an electric shock to the learner in the other room. There are 30 levels of shock, rising in 15-volt increments from an initial 15 volts to 450 volts. Each switch had the level and a description of the shock, ranging from mild at the start through the 10th level, 150 volts, strong, 13th level, 195 volts, very strong, 17th level, 255 volts, intense, 21st level, 315 volts, extremely intense, 25th level, 375 volts, danger, severe shock. The final two levels of 435 and 450 volts had no label other than an ominous XXX. To give them an idea of what it felt like, the participant teacher was given a taste of the third level, 45 volts, which induced a very real tingly pain. Initially, the experiment began fairly well as the learner repeated back the correct answers. However, when the learner began to make errors, the teacher was instructed by the man in the white coat to administer punishment shocks. Of course, the actor in the next room was not really receiving any shocks, but duly gave a more and more distressing performance as the intensity of the punishment shocks increased. At first, he started to complain the shocks hurt. Then they were painful. As the punishment voltages increased, so did the intensity of the screams. Soon the learner was pleading with the teacher and telling him that he had a heart condition. Many of the participants protested that they could not go on, but the man in the white coat replied impassively, "Please continue." At this point, the teachers were clearly stressed, shaking, and sweating, and yet they went on. Even after the intercom went silent, and they reached the 20th level of 300 volts, they were told that the learner's failure to answer the question was an error, and that the teacher must proceed with the punishment. Even after the intercom went silent
and they reached the 20th level of 300 volts, they were told that the learner's failure to answer the question was an error, counted as an error, and that the teacher must proceed with the punishment. What do you think you would do in such a situation? Before Milgram had started his study, he consulted a panel of 40 psychiatrists and asked what they predicted that members of the public would do. As experts on human psychology, they agreed that less than 1 in 100 participants would go all the way to the end. How wrong could they be? It turned out that 2 out of every 3 of the participants in Milgram's shocking study went all the way to the end at 450 volts. They were prepared to kill another human being at the request of the man in the white coat. Prepared. Maybe the participants knew this was all a trick and that no one was being hurt. I doubt it. I have watched the early recordings of this study, and it is fairly disturbing viewing as the teachers are clearly distressed as they become resigned to administering the lethal shocks. In a later study that would never get ethical approval today, researchers conducted the almost identical experiment using puppies punished with real electric shocks. This time there was no charade. The animals were clearly suffering. Although they were not receiving lethal shocks and the voltages were way below the descriptions the teachers thought they were administering. Half of the male teachers went all the way to the maximum punishment, and surprisingly, all of the female teacher participants obeyed the order to give them maximum shocks. The authority figure does not even have to be in the room. In another study with real nurses in a hospital, the participants received a telephone call from an unknown doctor who asked them to administer a 20 milliliter dose of a drug, estrogen, to a patient that he was on his way to visit. The label on the drug indicated that 5 milliliters was a normal dose, and it should not exceed 10 milliliters. All but one